This week on The Record, do you trust American elections? Do you have suspicions or questions? We go in depth with top election authorities in Illinois and Missouri to pull back the curtain on how the votes are cast, collected, and counted. It's all coming up right now. Welcome to The Record. I'm Mark Maxwell. The single biggest question hovering over this upcoming election and the 2020 election isn't the policies proposed by the presidential candidates, but rather, can we trust the outcome? Do you trust local election authorities spread all across all 50 states, often at the county level, to run a smooth election, to register valid voters, to print accurate ballots, to collect and count them correctly? If not, what specifically makes you skeptical? Maybe we can answer those questions. After all, American trust in elections is at an all-time low, and to be fair, parties on the losing side of elections have expressed concerns, albeit in different manners, over the years. So let's see if we can't get to the bottom of all these doubts and suspicions. We recently traveled to a small strip mall in Springfield, Illinois, the central nervous system for Illinois' election data, the Illinois State Board of Elections. Illinois always has had kind of a reputation. Go back to the election of 1960 in Chicago. Go back to the elections in the 1930s and 40 at the local level in Chicago. Can dead people vote?
Yes.
You've heard these stories.
Right.
Did it take a turn at some point where those sort of jokes took more root?
Well, I think those legends obviously had been around for a long time. And over time, they sort of became, almost a humorous, kind of perversely funny wisecracks about Chicago and the Chicago way and the Chicago machine and all this. And I always remind people, look, whatever happened in 1960, that was 64 years ago. We're in a new era now. You're not, the jokes about dead people voting have now, in a way, kind of morphed into complaints from people that we've got dead people on our voter rolls.
Mm-hmm. Which has happened before.
Well, it has happened, but we also...
How does the state catch that? And how does the state scrub any of those non-valid voters or their names from the rolls?
Well, under the National Voter Registration Act, all states are required to follow certain voter list maintenance procedures. And obviously, Illinois is in compliance with that.
Some states do it differently, though.
But it can vary state to state. Now, Illinois, probably the greatest tool that we have in Illinois is we are members of ERIC, which is the Electronic Registration Information Service. I'm sorry, Mark, it's the Electronic Registration Information Center. That's a consortium of a couple dozen states that share voter information across state lines. It shares drivers' motor vehicle information. It shares more information on voters than would be available to any single state attempting to verify voters that may have moved out of the state, may still have inactive registrations in another state, or may have an inactive registration in Illinois that needs to be removed because they've registered in another state.
It's a one-stop shop. It's a place where you've got all this information we can quickly identify. Does the Board of Elections or do local election authorities also communicate with coroners?
They communicate with the Illinois Department of Public Health. We have Social Security records that are available through our own electronic voter database that we maintain here.
Illinois, Governor Pritzker has said Illinois is going to be a welcoming state. And Republicans have hammered him recently for a lot of the state spending on migrant programs. There's been a lot of migrants, a lot of headlines around the migrants bust from Texas and elsewhere to Chicago and to parts of Illinois. Then there's the chatter from people who say, and a lot of these fall into Republican circles who say, they're just trying to beef up their voter rolls. Let's get into some of that. Mm-hmm. Can an undocumented migrant vote in Illinois?
No.
Why not?
In Illinois, you must, like in every other state in the nation, very first requirement to vote, you must be a citizen of the United States.
And to register to vote in Illinois, you have to have an ID.
Well, you have to have two pieces of ID to register to vote in Illinois. You have to prove your identity, you have to prove your residence. Now, once you fill out your application, your local election authority can take other steps to verify that that is in fact you and that your address is in fact valid.
But a non-citizen, a migrant, can get an ID in Illinois.
A non-citizen
A certain type of ID.
can get an ID. They can't register to vote. Now, this is federal law. You cannot have a proof of citizenship requirement as part of the voter registration process. Other states have tried this. It's been knocked down in federal court before. And the reason for that is that it's deemed as too high a burden for a simple voter registration to demand that someone bring in their birth certificate, something that shows.
It's a barrier to voting. What steps is Illinois taking to make sure no non-citizen votes?
We at the state board provide our local election authorities with a database, the Illinois Voter Registration System, that has tools such as a connection to the Social Security database, the federal database. Any new registration that provides a Social Security number can be checked against that. You can check death records against that. That's all available to local election authorities. They use it every single day as they vet and do their routine voter list maintenance. The other thing is that Illinois is statutorily required to be part of ERIC, the Electronic Registration Information Center. That puts us into a network with a couple dozen other states where we share information on motor vehicle registrations, on deaths, on voter registrations in other states, on potential double voting from people who may have registration active in Illinois and in another state and may have voted twice. Local election authorities have the ability
catch that.
to check there.
Matt, thanks for your time.
Thank you, Mark.
When we come back, one place Democrats and Republicans work together. Missouri's largest local election authority takes us behind the scenes next. True transparency in government is often more elusive than it should be. Sometimes prying the truth out of government bureaucracies can be quite a headache, but not at the local election authority that's the largest one in the state of Missouri. There, an open-door policy really does swing both ways. Democrats and Republicans both go in and out of locked doors together, and they work on a bipartisan basis to safeguard the changing of the guard, if you will. We sat down with Eric Fay and Rick Stream, the Democrat and Republican running the St. Louis County Election Board, to see how they're combating mistrust in elections, one skeptical voter at a time. There are studies that say you're more likely to be struck by lightning than you are to commit voter fraud in America. And yet, this question of voter fraud, this big doubt of voter fraud, is still out there. I think 26% of white American voters feel very confident there was mass voter fraud in the last major election. How do you fight that?
Well, I think here in St. Louis County, Missouri, and in Missouri in general, since we have very strict election laws requiring photo IDs, we don't mail ballots out to voters unless they've asked for the ballots. I think we try to create a climate where people have trust in the way we operate here in St. Louis County. We give tours of the place, we show people how we operate, we invite the public in to see all of our operations here, and including the audits that we do after the election when we do hand count audits. So our goal here in St. Louis County is to try to make the public aware of how we operate here in St. Louis County. We can't control what's happening in other counties or certainly other states, but we can control what goes on here. So we bring in a lot of people to see how we operate here in St. Louis County.
I was struck the other day I was watching this documentary, and in Eastern Europe, after the fall of the Berlin Wall, all these people were so grateful to finally have a say in the outcome of their government, to finally vote. It was this like earth-shattering discovery they had. And I wonder if that ever occurs to you, if you sit here and think how we cheapen the idea of the vote when we cast so much doubt on it.
Personally, I think before the last few elections, when both sides were saying that the election was stolen or they didn't believe it was fair, people still felt that their vote didn't count sometimes. And it wasn't a matter of voting in a Democratic area and you were a Republican. It was that they just didn't think it would make any difference. There were never any close races, therefore their vote didn't count. And we have discovered here in St. Louis County, especially in the April elections for the local elections, that 1 or 2 votes will count. We can't force people to vote. We can make sure that if they're an American citizen, they can register, and if they're a registered voter, we make it as easy as possible to vote.
I suppose one of the challenges you might face is that often you're trying to prove something that didn't happen. It's hard enough to prove something that did to a skeptic. How do you go about proving a negative?
Part of proving that, or if that's, I don't even know if that's a good way to describe it, is, when people talk about voter fraud or that they might believe there's voter fraud in elections, our experience has been that fraud in elections is rare, but that it does occur. And that it usually occurs in municipal elections, small elections where the turnout is low. But I think what people can take solace in is that when people do try to cheat, we catch them. We've had a few people prosecuted for voter fraud in St. Louis County in the last several years. And so I think that's important for people to remember, that there are robust checks and balances in place throughout this whole process. And if you try to abuse this process, we're going to catch you.
When Missouri finally implemented the voter ID, and you had to bring that, what was the change that you saw? Did you start to detect more cases of mistaken identity or of potential fraud? What was the finding after the change?
I don't know that we've found anything particularly different after that change.
Did it change turnout at all?
That's not been our experience, that it hasn't affected turnout. I think, what we find, frankly, is photo voter ID law in Missouri has affected 2 populations of people. The first population of people are folks who leave their IDs at home or in the car, and then they have to fill out a provisional ballot, go back and get their ID. The second population are folks who moved Missouri and don't get a Missouri driver's license before the election. And so if you don't have a Missouri ID or a passport or a military ID, you have to vote a provisional ballot. So it's people that are living in Missouri and have a photo ID, just not a Missouri ID. That's who we see voting provisional ballots because they don't bring ID to the polls.
I've heard other election officials describe this vocal minority of people who don't trust in it. And I don't know how to scale that. Are there untold stories of people who come in, do your survey, you do the show and tell, they see all your gear, and there's an aha moment? Are there people who are now believers that maybe were skeptics?
Oh, that's certainly been our experience. That, as Rick mentioned previously, we really enjoy giving tours. And really since 2016, 2020, we have tried to make that a more robust experience and to try to have more groups in. We have community groups in on a very regular basis to give them tours. And almost every time when folks finish the tour here, it's very enlightening. People tend to think, what could be interesting at the election board? It's some, austere government office, and it's really not. I mean, we're sitting out in this warehouse now. There's a lot that goes into elections, and there are a lot of robust, again, security and checks and balances in place. And when people see that with their own eyes, they understand that, if something were to happen or if somebody would try something, the election officials are going to protect them against that.
In all the acrimony, in all the red versus blue, you guys like each other? It seems like you guys get along pretty well.
We do. We're in here. We're in this job to ensure that the people of St. Louis County can vote, and that the elections are fair, honest, that we run them accurately, and without any controversy.
Does it add to the voter confidence or to the general trust that there's a Republican and a Democrat working together? How does that equation boost or amplify voter confidence?
Right. We're one of 6 bipartisan election boards in Missouri, 2 here on St. Louis side, 4 over on the Kansas City side, and I think that goes a long way to convincing people out in the field, out in the public, that a Republican and a Democrat are in every position of these bipartisan boards that manages the ballots and the equipment. I think that really helps tamp down any concern about one side stealing votes or doing something illegal.
She studies elections for a living. When we come back, political analyst and expert Professor Anita Mannion. Welcome back. Expert political science professor Anita Mannion is here. And Anita, we often enjoy your analysis of current events for the record, but some in our audience may not know that you co-authored a study for MIT's Election Data and Science Lab on in-person voting. Part of your research examined ways to improve voter confidence. What did you find?
Well, overall, we see the goal of elections is making it easy to vote and hard to cheat. And so when we think about voter confidence, it has a lot to do with their experience at the polling place. Was it easy to find the polling place? Did you wait, ideally 30 minutes or less? Do you trust the results that your ballot is going to be counted accurately? And people tend to trust their local and state elections more than they do federal elections.
Are there things that local election authorities can do to make it easier to vote or to make it harder to cheat? Things that we're not doing now?
Yeah, they can. About 36 states have voter ID laws, which 80% of the American public support. There's mixed research showing whether that actually helps prevent fraud or if it lowers voter turnout, but that's one thing that many states do.
But it helps confidence.
It helps confidence. And also just making sure to clearly communicate. With so many allegations of voter fraud, with so many changing laws around elections, it's really important that those local election officials are trusted messengers and get that information out.
Yeah, and the voter ID sometimes touches to the voter experience, because I reading through your study, it looked like a lot of times it was about convenience for voters. It was about the longer they wait in line, the longer that line backs up, then the more frustrated people get, the more, hey, what's going on here, feeling people can go away with.
Yeah, if your experience isn't good, whether it's you had to wait in a long line, you got frustrated because you forgot your ID, something like that, it just makes you less confident in the system overall.
Then there was this interesting question, I didn't even think about this, but sometimes the way people go about filling out their ballot can change. And it said you recommended to use certain features on a ballot to reduce the number of times that someone might list an unrecorded vote or just an error on a ballot.
Yeah, so we looked at all the best practices and research that's been done, and using things like making sentences short, making it at an 8th grade reading level, using bold and italics, not having confusing text. If we think back to the 2000 election, that's the example of what not to do, right? But there are best practices that can make that voting experience better and make it more likely that you accurately cast your vote how you meant to.
We just heard from St. Louis County, they're one election authority that's doing this thing where they're having pop-up or vote anywhere locations, so that way you're not just anchored to your precinct in your neighborhood, but maybe you're coming home from work. This adds to that convenience factor. People are liking it?
That's right. It's definitely a convenience reform, and we surveyed both poll workers and voters in St. Louis County, and they both overwhelmingly support that reform. One reason is if you go to your polling place and it's closed or it's moved, you don't get turned away. You can go vote at any polling place in St. Louis County.
Your research also looked at ballot design and how that can affect voters. I was surprised to learn that New Jersey has used this party line system. Maybe you're familiar. It boosts insiders that are preferred by the people already in power by putting them in a more prominent spot on the top of the ballot, and then relegates other, maybe lesser known candidates to what they call ballot Siberia. It's a obscure spot farther down the line. Now, New Jersey may be in the process of trying to abolish that system, but most states make an effort to be more fair than this. Just how big of a factor is that where someone's name is on a ballot and how someone may vote for or against them?
Yeah, and not just if you vote for or against, but if you complete your ballot. Some people, one of our recommendations for ballots is don't have a million things on the ballot. So if you're lower down, it's more likely that no one's going to cast their vote for you. So yeah, those issues of transparency are important, and people on both sides of the aisle, though, control the process and try to get their advantage in.
And if someone has questions, if they're skeptical, where do they go? How can they get their questions answered?
The best places you can go to are your local election officials. So your St. Louis County, St. Charles County, St. Louis City, wherever you live, those are your trusted messengers. They know the rules and they're going to get you the right information.
Or tune in and watch Anita Mannion.
That's right.
Thanks. We'll be right back after this. We packed a lot of information into those interviews, but some just had to hit the cutting room floor. You can catch all of those extended interviews up on our website, ksdk.com. Just click on the politics tab. That's where you're going to catch all of our full shows there. Or you can leave us a tip or leave a note. Just text record to 314-425-5355 and we'll stay in touch. And you can always tune in here every Sunday night for the latest political news in Missouri and Illinois. But that's all of our time for this week. We'll be right back here at the same time next week. Until then, we're off the record.